The screams started as a ripple, then a wave. Dust, thick and hot, choked the air, mixing with the metallic tang of blood and the sour stench of fear. They came from everywhere, or so it seemed, hidden blades and unseen arrows tearing into flesh, ripping through the Mongol formations. Great horses, once symbols of unstoppable power, now thrashed in agony, their roars mingling with the dying cries of men. Riders, moments before arrogant and invincible, tumbled from their saddles, their heavy armor a death sentence in the sudden chaos. This was not a retreat. This was a slaughter. A calculated, methodical dismantling of a force believed to be a plague upon the earth. The Mongol commanders, veterans of countless victories, found themselves blinded, cornered, and dying in a forgotten valley. They had ridden in with the sun at their backs, confident. They had expected an easy hunt. What they found was a carefully laid graveyard, waiting for them since the first shovel hit the dirt. Before the Mongols, the world trembled. In the early years of the 13th century, a new storm had risen from the eastern steppes, a whirlwind of horsemen and steel. They swept across Asia, leaving empires in ruins and cities as mounds of ash. The Khwarazmian Empire, once vast and mighty, had been the latest to fall. Its golden cities burned, its armies scattered, its Shah fleeing in terror. The Mongol war machine seemed to have no weakness, no end to its brutal hunger. But not everyone broke. Not every heart turned to dust. There was one who refused to yield, one who had seen his father's empire crumble and swore he would not follow the same path. Prince Jalal ad-Din Mingburnu, a man forged in the fires of defeat, rallied the broken remnants. He was a refugee, a warrior without a kingdom, but with a fierce, burning resolve that refused to be extinguished. He knew he couldn't face the Mongols in open battle. Their numbers, their discipline, their sheer momentum were too great. But in the crags and passes of the Afghan mountains, a different kind of war could be fought. He pulled together what was left: Khwarazmian regulars, Afghan tribesmen, Gorian warriors, men who had lost everything and had nothing left but their will to fight. They were hungry, tired, and desperate, but they shared a common enemy. Jalal ad-Din chose his ground with the precision of a hunter. A valley near Parwan, narrow and winding, its slopes dotted with rocky outcrops and hidden ravines. It was a place where numbers wouldn't matter as much as cunning. For weeks they labored in the unforgiving terrain, under the scorching sun of late summer 1221. Men drove picks and spades into the hard, sun-baked earth, carving out concealed positions. The dust, fine and gritty, settled in their throats and coated their skin. They moved boulders, creating choke points. They practiced ambushes, their voices low, their movements precise. Every man knew his role. Every arrow had a target. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, dry earth, and the faint, metallic tang of newly sharpened blades. The nights were cold and still. The only sounds the rustle of the wind through the sparse mountain brush and the distant howl of a jackal. Fear was a constant companion, but so was a grim determination. They dug. They waited. They knew the Mongols would come. The Mongol general, Shigi Kutuku, foster brother to Genghis Khan himself, was leading a contingent tasked with hunting down these last stubborn pockets of resistance. Soon, the dust clouds appeared on the horizon. Not a whisper of wind, but the earth itself seemed to rumble, a vast, dark tide flowing into the valley mouth. The sun glinted off thousands of helmets, a wave of cold steel and unforgiving resolve. The thud of hooves grew louder, a deep, resonant drumbeat that vibrated through the ground where the Khwarazmian fighters lay hidden. The air was filled with the jingle of harness, the low murmur of orders, and the casual, confident laughter of men who believed they were unstoppable. From their concealed positions, the defenders watched. They could smell the horses, the leather, the unwashed scent of a marching army. Every nerve was stretched taut, every breath held. The tension was a physical weight pressing down on them. Jalal ad-Din watched, a hawk-like intensity in his eyes. His men were a whisper, while the Mongols were a thunderclap. The disparity was stark, but the prince had faith in his plan and in the sheer desperation of his warriors. Then, on that sweltering afternoon, around August 25th, 1221, the trap was sprung. Not with a shout, but with a sudden, whistling rain of arrows. They struck without warning, a deadly downpour from unseen hands, tearing through the Mongol vanguard. Chaos erupted. Horses screamed, rearing in terror, throwing riders who were instantly trampled underfoot. The Mongols, accustomed to attacking, not being ambushed, were caught completely off guard. Their disciplined ranks fractured, unable to find an enemy to face. The narrow valley became a killing field. Arrows rained from the cliffs, rocks tumbled down, blocking escape routes. The air filled with the cries of the wounded, the clash of steel, and the guttural shouts of men suddenly fighting for their lives against an invisible foe. The Mongol cavalry, their greatest strength, became their greatest weakness. Jammed into the confined space, they couldn't maneuver, couldn't wheel, couldn't unleash their thunderous charges. They were targets, packed shoulder to shoulder. Panic began to set in. Commanders bellowed orders that were lost in the cacophony. Soldiers, trained to follow, now found themselves striking at shadows, stumbling over their own dead, or impaling their comrades in the desperate crush. The dust kicked up by thousands of thrashing hooves and struggling men turned the valley into a blinding, suffocating cloud. Friend couldn't distinguish foe. The Mongols, masters of open plains, were lost in this man-made, mountain-forged hell. Then came the second wave, a feigned retreat from Jalal ad-Din's center, drawing the Mongols deeper into the valley's throat. Shigi Kutuku, enraged, saw a chance to break them, to corner them once and for all. He ordered his men forward, pushing into the very heart of the trap. That was the signal. From the hidden ravines on the flanks, the Khwarazmian reserves surged forward. They slammed into the Mongols' sides, cutting them off, driving them further into the bottleneck. It was a hammer and anvil strike, perfectly executed. Jalal ad-Din himself, riding at the head of his hardened warriors, led a ferocious charge. His saber flashed, a blur of silver in the dust and blood. This was not just a battle. It was a furious act of vengeance, a desperate fight for survival. Hand-to-hand combat raged, brutal and unforgiving. Scimitars met Mongol sabers, axes bit into bone. The ground became slick with blood, the air thick with the smell of iron and sweat. The roar of the fight filled the valley, a sound that would echo in the mountains for years. The Mongols, for the first time in generations, broke. They turned and fled, those who could. They scrambled back through the passes, leaving behind thousands of their dead, their vaunted general barely escaping with a fraction of his force. It was an utter, undeniable catastrophe for the horde. As night descended, a chilling wind swept through the valley, carrying the groans of the dying and the stench of death. Torches flickered, casting long, dancing shadows over the grim tableau. The field was a mosaic of shattered bodies, broken weapons, and riderless horses. The silence that followed the battle was heavier than any noise, a profound stillness broken only by the crackle of a small fire or the distant cry of a carrion bird. Jalal ad-Din rode slowly through the aftermath, his face streaked with dirt and blood. There were no cheers, no triumphant shouts, only the solemn, exhausted faces of his surviving warriors. They had won, but the cost was etched into every line of their faces. It was a grim victory, a necessary one. The world needed to know that the Mongols were not invincible, that even the greatest empires could bleed and be beaten. News traveled slowly in the 13th century, but by October 1221, whispers of the Mongol defeat at Parwan began to spread. Messengers rode hard across deserts and mountains, carrying the impossible tidings to distant courts. To the Sultan of Egypt, to the Caliph in Baghdad, to the stunned monarchs of Europe, the news arrived with a mix of disbelief and a desperate, fragile hope. The unstoppable wave had been momentarily checked. For decades after 1221, the Battle of Parwan served as a stark reminder. A small, desperate army, led by a prince with nothing left to lose, had defied the greatest power on earth. It proved that even when facing overwhelming odds, the will to fight, coupled with cunning and a chosen battlefield, could change the course of history. It was a testament to the nation that refused to die, carving its stand in blood and stone.